now that you know how to play Dungeon Command, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Because Mike and I agree about the game, I'm going to roll to see who is going to argue for it and who will argue against. If it's even, I'll take the pros, and if it's odd, he will. Again, it's even.
All right, so
once.
This time, Tom is going to tell you how much he's into this game.
And Mike will tell you why it's bad. So let's start with, it's a, I think, pretty impressive merging of Magic the Gathering and D&D minis. Anyone who's played both of those games, who then plays Dungeon Command, is going to immediately recognize a lot of elements from both of those games. I think the biggest thing that comes through about those two games is that it essentially is D&D minis, except they took the dice out of the combat and replaced it with the Magic the Gathering stacking mechanic. I think it just makes a really borderline elegant game. There's lots of other things that make it something I wouldn't call an elegant game, but that element of it, I like. I like it a lot.
You know, I couldn't disagree with you more there, Tom. It is not an elegant game. So, I mean, good try, but no way.
I did say
this one, not even on the border, folks. This one inherits all the rulesiness from both its parents. Magic the Gathering has that messy stack. D&D has the messy corners, and this has both. So, in Dungeon Command, you have the hard corners on the inside, which you can't move around, and then you have soft corners on the outside, which you can move around. Who knows? You have 4 different kinds of terrain. I think they could have rolled those into a few. I mean, there's only minor differences between them. You have 4 different movement abilities, 2 of which are identical except for name. The other 2 are only different in that one can move through walls. You have burrowing, which can move through walls. Flying, which can do everything but move through walls. It seems like they used a lot of design space in throwing tons of different kind of abilities and keywords on there that just really kind of clutters the board. I mean, there's icons all over this thing. And it's just very difficult to kind of count your movement when you're adding one for the different types of terrain. You maybe take damage if you move through that. You have to know if you can move around corners or not. You have to stop when you hit somebody. You have to maybe argue with your buddy about whether flying allows you to move a lot when you start adjacent to a character or not. There's just a lot of nitty-gritty to this game. It holds together okay, but it's just not as clean as it could be. It's inherited too much mess.
Well, that is a little bit of the charm that it does inherit from both of those parents. Like I said, if you're a fan of both of those games, you'll probably be okay with the rulesy elements. But part of what I was talking about when I was saying borderline elegant is look at how the level system with the monsters, the creatures, and the leadership works on your leader guy there. So the leadership, the higher of that, the larger your squad can be, and you add up all their levels. If it has to be less than your leadership, that's pretty simple, pretty basic. The same kind of mechanic with the ability score keywords. I don't know what you would call them in this game, but they're basically ability scores from D&D. Mm-hmm. You have to have that ability score on that card, on that creature, to play a card that's tied to that ability. And those are just really simple and elegant systems that really tie the deck together with the squad, that it just sort of brings the game's theme together pretty well.
Yeah, I have to say, the level system with the traits does work well. It does unite your squad with the deck you've built. Rather than building 2 separate things, you're really building one merged force. That's pretty cool. But unfortunately, a lot of the decks that come pre-built are not built very well. In the Goblin deck, for instance, there are 3 spells that require intelligence. Mm-hmm. There's only 1 Goblin that has intelligence. Now, that's perfectly thematic that the Goblins don't have int, but to put 3 cards that are unplayable unless you have 1 guy, or a scroll that lets you one-time use kind of replace him, that's just ridiculous.
What do we figure out? It's like 12% of that deck is unplayable unless you have one of those cards?
Right, something like that.
That's pretty bad.
It is very bad. So, yeah, it's 3 cards in the 36-card deck, I think. So it just makes it very difficult when you don't know what especially if you haven't really poured over the deck and looked through it to know that stuff's in there.
Sure.
You know, when I played, I didn't take the Hobgoblin Sorcerer, and halfway through I had 2 int cards in my hand, and I kind of regretted not playing him, and then I couldn't draw him from my deck of creatures. So yeah, that part just doesn't work out too well. I understand why they put those int cards in there because they want to try to build a card base for people to build with.
Sure.
But if you're going to be building like really competitive decks with this, you're going to need to pick up 3 or 4 copies of it every given set just to have that kind of tournament level game.
Sure,
which is obscene. To have to buy that much stuff just to get that use out of those 3 cards in your set. I mean, I think of this as being predominantly because of the price point. It's a good deal, but I think of this predominantly as a game you're going to play with the pre-built factions, not as one you're going to play in a tournament setting, with stuff that you're bringing to the table. So to see design space used for that is a little annoying.
Hopefully, for avid fans of the game, we'll see something like we saw with HeroScape, where you could buy just the individual components. You don't need to go buy complete sets.
Yeah, like a booster pack of cards would be pretty nice. Yeah.
But speaking of components, the components in this are pretty awesome. You mentioned that the price point is reasonable, and it's really impressive for what you get in the box when you consider the price point. The miniatures are top notch. You can compare some of these same miniatures to miniatures, identical or very similar miniatures that were released for the D&D miniatures line, and you can see just the improvement in quality in that short time frame between the 2 games. Some of them are the exact same sculpt, but the redone paint job, and I don't know what was done on the back end, but something was done, and you can just tell that they're really impressive. And beyond that, everything else is really durable. You've got nice cards, nice chits, nice board. The only thing I maybe have a problem with is this is a little thin, the character board. I would kind of like it to be thicker, but otherwise, components are great, and they come with stuff for the other D&D board games.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, what's the name of that?
The D&D Adventure Series.
Yes, that's right. The D&D Adventure Series, Castle Ravenloft, I think, is one of them.
Legend of Drizzt.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
So all of these components come with instructions in the rulebook and materials to be used with those games. That's also very cool.
Yeah, that's not much of a pro for me. I don't have any of those games, but it is nice to see Wizards do that to allow you to play these with those games right out of the box. That's a nice gesture. I do appreciate it. But when it comes down to it, Tom, it's all about the gameplay for me. You know me, and you know that I really like to be immersed in a game like this. This is one where, they went through all the trouble of making gorgeous minis like my Troll, but they didn't go through the same level of care and level of design with the card effects. For that matter, a lot of the characters, a lot of the creatures don't have abilities. For instance, we have 2 vanilla guys right here. Now, in a set where you're getting 12 miniatures and you're getting, 12 character cards to go with them, and some characters are repeated. For instance, there's 2 Drow House cards in the Sting of Lolth set. For only having 12 guys and 2 of them don't have any special abilities whatsoever, that's a little lazy to me. And beyond that, the order cards fall into a very small number of pretty repeated and generic categories.
Yeah.
I feel like every order card is prevent 30 damage, deal plus 30 damage. It's one of those. Everything's one of those too. I mean, it might have a little bit of nuance to it. Oh, move 3 spaces before you do 30 damage. But at their heart, they're not very interesting.
No, there are just a handful that do sort of engage you, like Sneak Attack comes to mind. But the others, fall short.
Yeah, for instance, Sneak Attack lets you have 2 guys group up and do a big 100 damage attack to somebody. Yeah. That is thematic. But we mentioned this is kind of a descendant of Magic the Gathering to some extent. But it does not have the flavor that the MTG cards have. That's one thing that Magic has done really well. Every color feels fleshed out. For this one, no way. I don't feel like when I'm playing Sting of Lolth that I'm really playing something that drastically different from when I'm playing the Goblins. They have little differences. If you really pour over the decks, you'll notice them. Mm-hmm. But they all have the same formulaic kind of decks, and that's really makes this game lower for me.
Yeah, I think it probably makes it pretty easy to balance the game internally, but it does make it a little less engaging.
But what do you think of it overall?
Well, this is exactly my kind of game. I'm probably not going to pick it up just because it's a little more. It's the same problem I see with HeroScape. It's going to take a lot of investment to really be competitive at it. So I'm probably not going to invest myself in it. But it's really fun. It's engaging, and like I mentioned before, it comes with minis that I can repurpose. That's another big hit for me. So I'm going to give it 8 out of 10.
Yeah, this one, I bought the first 5 sets that have been released, and I was really excited for it. I thought it was going to give me some of that like Epic Duel style, card and mini based combat that I really love, that I've enjoyed in Summoner Wars, that I've enjoyed in Epic Duels. You're starting to see them more and more. I love that category. I thought I would love this diceless combat system. but it doesn't quite do it for me. There's just not enough flavor to the cards. The cards feel a little generic. And for my personal taste, I really wish you drew 2 cards a turn instead of just the 1. I might house rule that in the future, just because I don't feel like I get to do enough in this game. So for me, 6 out of 10. It's better than average, but it's just falls short a little bit.
All right, that's our review of Dungeon Command. Get ready for the breakdown. It's time for the breakdown of Dungeon Command from Wizards of the Coast. The game takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to play, possibly longer if you have a couple of cautious players. So we give it 70 long and 30 short. There's not too much you can do on your opponent's turn, and the turns aren't always fast, so we give it 35 fast and 65 slow. We give it 30 luck and 70 skill. There's plenty of randomness present in the order and creature cards, but combat is all skill. You can sometimes plan a turn or 2 ahead, but you're always adapting to what your opponent did on his turn, so we give it 25 strategy and 75 tactics. Because it's a direct conflict combat game, and because of how the stack works together, we give it 80 interaction, but there is some potential for independence in deck and squad building, so we give it 20 independence. We give it 70 immersion, particularly because of how the levels and leadership interact and the traits and order cards interact, but we give it 30 abstraction because most of the cards are bland and feel mechanical. If you've played either Magic the Gathering or D&D minis, this game will feel familiar, so we give it 30 simplicity. But it does inherit a lot of the complexity of both of those games, so we give it 70 complexity. We give it 60 grandeur because the components look great spread out all over the table, and if you get all the expansions, it's going to take up a lot of shelf space. But you could just pack up your squad and take it to your friends or a tournament, so we give it 40 portability. We give it 95 expandability because there are a bunch of expansions, and more factions in the game is only going to make it cooler. We only give it 5 completeness because there's not really a full game in one box. For our trophy scales, we give it 2 trophies in originality. It is basically a hybrid of D&D minis and Magic the Gathering, but the diceless combat is really appealing. We give it 5 trophies for value. For the price, you get a lot of quality components. Mike gave Dungeon Command a 6 out of 10, Tom gave it an 8 out of 10, and that is the breakdown of Dungeon Command.